Welcome to this edition of the Epic Homebrew Reveal. I'm Captain Kurt from epicbeertrips.com. Here's how this program works. I pick a beer theme, I reach out to brewers and homebrewers around the world. We collaborate virtually on ingredients and making beer related to that theme. Then we go forth, we brew beer. We get back together for the big reveal. And we share insights about the brewing process. We share our thoughts about the beer. We share a beer rating and we share recipes. So sit back, enjoy the show. Maybe have yourself a beer. Cheers.
Well, welcome everybody back to another episode of Epic Beer Trip Homebrew Reveal. And this episode is all about the stout. And we'll go into more detail about that later. But thanks for watching. And I'm so excited to have everybody with us today.
Yeah, so let's start by giving everybody an intro. So Captain Kurt's the main man here who organizes all of this from Epic Beer Trips, hence the Epic Homebrew Reveal. And today we have a special guest, Matt from Oil Creek Brewing, who is with us. Hey, Matt.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on. And tell us where you're from, too.
I'm from Titusville, Pennsylvania.
All right, cool. And if you've tuned in before, you know Caleb by now, but from Psych Dog Brewing. And he's going to kind of be leading the way as far as keeping us on track with official beer styles and whatnot. But for today's reveal, everyone did a stout, but that was kind of open to interpretation. So we have an oyster stout, we have a bourbon truffle stout, and a gorilla stout, which I'm not even sure what that means, which is exciting.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, so stout can definitely mean a lot of different things. You know, a lot of people think, stouts are heavy and rich, and I don't like that. Stouts can be really light and even low alcohol sometimes. And so, in the BJCP style guidelines, here are all the stout or close. So we'll start with the Baltic Porter, Irish Stout, Irish Extra Stout, Sweet Stout, Oatmeal Stout, Tropical Stout, Foreign Extra Stout, American Porter, American Stout, Imperial Stout, and now, of course, like Pastry Stout, and some would even argue like a Black IPA, but some would argue not. And now you can even have a blonde stout, which that's a pretty unique style where it's actually pours like a pale ale, but it tastes like a stout. So it's kind of a mind bender there. But typically stouts are rich and complex, definitely focused around roasted malts or roasted type flavors such as coffee, chocolate, toffee, nutty, and caramel. And a lot of that is done, yes, with the roasted malts, but also some of the specialty malts, such as like chocolate malt, carafa, dark rye, midnight wheat, a lot of different stouts, malts that can create that roasty type flavor. And then you can actually use coffee, chocolate itself to enhance that. And a lot of times, hence the rich and complex, stouts are layered with both in the mash, in the fermentation, and post-fermentation, trying to add that complexity. And we'll talk about some of the unique complexities that each of us did to make our stouts. But I was thinking, Kurt, why don't you take it from here and tell us about your stout?
Excellent. I'm going to go. I created a stout called the Epic Derry Oyster Stout. Now, what really got me kind of fired up about the stout, I was in Derry, Northern Ireland, or as they say, some say over in Ireland, the north of Ireland. I was there last summer, and I went to this place called Walled City Brewing. And I had a flight of beers there. It was fantastic beers. And then the server said, "Hey, you need to try this oyster stout." I'm like, I don't know. But I tell you, I tried it. It was it's my favorite beer of 2023. It was a fantastic beer. So I'm like, I was all fired up when I came home. I'm like, I'm going to make this for the Epic Homebrew Reveal, and it's going to be fantastic. And guess what? I have the beer here. It's not as fantastic as I hoped, but I'll talk a little bit about it. So you see the head on it's actually pretty light. The ABV on this is just a little over 3, so it's on the lighter side. Now it does have a little aroma. I'm getting some briny kind of stuff from the oysters. I made a small batch. That's the good thing when you make a beer that doesn't turn out that great. It's a small batch. I used Maris Otter, flake barley, roasted barley, and chocolate malt as the malts, and it's the regular Stout Ale, with the SO4 yeast. So, and then I put for 3 gallons. Again, I found a recipe online, so it looked good. It sounded good. I put 3 oysters in there. They were shucked, so I put the shells, the oysters, and the juice all in. So I'm getting some brininess with it. So I'm not getting what I got at the one I drank at Wall City. That one was a little sweeter. Plus it was nitro, so it was real creamy, which of course I don't have that ability.
Can't compete with anything on nitro, that's for sure.
Yeah,
and
I also I put some when I was in Northern Ireland. I also went to Titanic Distillery. It's a distillery that's at the shipyard where they built the Titanic. Fantastic distillery, and they just started making whiskey. And I tell you, for this is a non-age statement whiskey. It's really good, and I put a little of that in as well. So, so I don't really know the exact ABV. It was a little over 3 before I put the whiskey in. So I'm kind of thinking maybe I should have put more whiskey. I don't know. Now I'll say this: when I first had it, I was like, Kayla, I told you, I'm like, oh man, it's been sitting around for a month or so. It's slightly better, but something. I don't know if maybe I had a better kind of stout recipe, I might try it again, but I'm not quite sure. On the highly sophisticated hop leaf scale, I would give it a 2.5. So it sometimes happens when you homebrew. You don't always hit home runs. So I'm gonna drink it, right? So it's not gonna go to waste. I just I'd have to really think hard if I'm going to make it again. Now, anybody out there has a great stout recipe, Matt, you mentioned you might, feel free to send it my way.
Yeah,
and, sometimes maybe this winter when I'm really bored, I'll try it again. So
I wonder if adding more oyster would give it, more brininess, a little, and part of, the oyster shells, it's not just the brininess, it's also pulling calcium out, right? Because the wort's going to be slightly acidic and is actually going to pull some of that calcium out of the shell and can change kind of the mouthfeel and that kind of thing.
Make it a little creamier.
Yeah, and that
So let's go back to this whiskey edition. Was that in the brewing, or you did that afterwards?
No, I just I actually it was 3 gallons, so I was bottling. So I put half of it just the regular, and then I put some whiskey in the other, half of it. So, and quite honestly, the stuff the bottles I put the whiskey in, that's what I'm giving the 2.5.
Yeah.
Fair enough. We'll note this on the recipes. Also, these will all be available on epicbeertrips.com later. So we have a blog up there. You can download the recipes. Sounds like you may want to opt for one of the other ones than Kurt's first round of an oyster stout, but
okay. It's all part of the process.
You can see how it's made.
Yeah, don't always hit home runs. It's okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So we're going with a 2.5 on this one, right? So if anyone's not familiar with what our hop scale is, it's a 1 to 5. Sounds like this was a middle of the road beer. Probably not going to be brewed again unless he gets hooked up with Matt's recipe.
There you go.
Yeah.
And really bored, and I don't know what to do on a chilly, winter afternoon in Ohio. So
Yep. So is it turned off cold there? I see you got the fireplace in the back. Looks like you're cooking it outside, so not too bad.
Yeah, actually not bad. It's in the 40s, but it's kind of crazy here at the Epic Beer Trips World Headquarters in Galena, Ohio. It snowed here on on Halloween. So I don't know if that's a good thing or not.
Yeah.
What the weather's going to be like this year, but yeah, it's all right though. You know, drinking the Oyster Stout. I have some of the Titanic as a backup, and I have the fire. It's all good.
There you go. Cool. I like it.
All right. Well, Matt, you wanna take us from here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I brewed what I called Vanilla Gorilla. Vanilla Gorilla. Oh, there we go. It is a 12% barrel aged stout.
Whoa.
This beer was brewed between me and my buddy Ray, who runs 1419 Brewing. And every so often we get together. We went to high school together, and I got him into brewing over COVID. But anyway, we get together and we brew a few times a year. The Oyster Stout was actually one of the beers that he and I have brewed together twice. And this is, I think, the third barrel-aged beer that he and I have done. And this particular beer, I will go over the recipe before I pour it. But I use just 2-row flaked oats, some chocolate malt, some roasted barley, some black malt, and some Crystal 120. This particular beer had an original gravity of around, it was 1.120 and 1.035. And we double batched it. So those numbers are loose because one was higher, one was lower. So I kind of took what I thought was about the average of that. This beer did come out to 12%. We bought a bourbon barrel from McGlaughlins Distillery, which is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And we bought a couple bottles of their, I don't know what their high-end bourbon is. And we took 8 ounces of it, and I took 8 vanilla beans, and I soaked those 8 vanilla beans, for 2 weeks. The whole entire time fermentation was going in the fermenters. I took the vanilla beans and I had them in a mason jar with that bourbon, and I would shake it up. Every day I'd walk by it before I went to work, and I'd shake it up, and then I'd set it down. And when I'd come home, I'd shake it up again, and I'd set it down. So that bourbon that was in there was really saturated. It was very, very vanilla-y. And so once fermentation was complete, I took the beer and I transferred it to the barrel. And in the barrel, I also mixed in that bourbon and those vanilla beans. I should note that I split the vanilla beans before I put them in that mason jar with the bourbon. And it sat for 6 months. And when it came out, we decided to, I put it in 2 kegs, carved it up, and then we canned it. And I'm thrilled with the beer. As I told you guys before we started, this is actually the last can that I have. He has some more cans, but it's the last can that I have. And you can see that is
really dark.
Yeah.
Very thick. Shout out. This is my Erie Ale Works glass. Shout out to them, local brewery. I did a little collaboration, hazy IPA with them back in August. But tons of vanilla aroma, chocolate, even a little marshmallows and a little coconut on that aroma.
Wow.
I think I'm a little off on my final gravity. I think my final gravity was around 1028 on this. I don't think it was 1035. So that means that my starting was probably 1113 or 1112, somewhere in that neighborhood. I think that was what we averaged it out as. So it's got a very thick mouthfeel at 1028. You have a lot of chocolate, a lot of roast. That vanilla is coming through really hard. Super happy with how this came out. I mean, there's even like a toasted marshmallow flavor to it, which is crazy because, it sat in that bourbon barrel, and that bourbon barrel was of course toasted number 2 or 3 char. I can't remember, but man, that really just comes through. It's just a wonderful flavor. If I'm giving this a rating of 4.5, out of the bourbon barrel beers I've made, this one here's the best.
Nice. Well,
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, no kidding. How's the oak presence at 6 months?
It's good. It's there. It's not overpowering. Of course, I think a lot of that sweetness and a lot of that vanilla, I won't say it hides it, but it makes it just it has a role in there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Sometimes that can really overpower it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
So
And
I'm sure through your connections, you're able to get barrels, just being in the industry. But for folks that don't have a connection, any tips for that? Or also, can you just infuse the barrel flavor with just like a piece of it if you're not actually don't have enough for like a full barrel? Or what would you recommend to someone that's starting out and wanting to experiment?
So what I would do if you're starting to homebrew and you want to do a little bit of that barrel character, you can buy oak chips, you can buy oak spirals. And you can buy American oak, you can buy French oak, you can even buy Hungarian oak. We, of course, used American white oak, and it was a barrel. So you can buy a white oak, charred spirals. You can add those into your beer. Of course, surface area is important. So if you use chips, you would have a less of a time of exposure. You can use cubes even. That's a little more time, and then oak spirals I think is even a little more time than that. I've never used the cubes or the spirals. I have done the chips, however, and you can infuse your beers with those sorts of techniques. I always recommend taking samples of your beer if you're doing that every few days at least, because I've done the chips, and I've had those infuse enough flavor in 4 or 5 days that have almost over oaked. And you want to be careful. You don't want to over oak.
Yeah. No, it kind of more feels like you're chewing on a piece of bark than drinking a beer. And the tannins that can pull out of the wood too is very, it's almost sticky and dry in your mouth. And
Sure.
it can get kind of acrid and nasty.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't want to do that. And to be honest with you, it's pretty easy anymore to procure a barrel. Midwest Barrel Company, you can buy 5 and 10 gallon barrels. We got a 10-gallon barrel from a local distillery. There's a lot of local distilleries all around the country anymore. If you reach out to them, and they have bourbon barrels, rum barrels, whatever they have, I would reach out to them first and see if you have the ability to brew 5 gallons or 10 gallons. You can fill up one of those barrels after fermentation and just let it ride.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I got a 5-gallon barrel from Journeyman Distillery, and 291 is what I aged my stout in, and that's from Colorado Springs. And I think Garrison Brothers in High Texas, they do like 15-gallon barrels, and so a lot of options on the smaller formats.
Even small. I purchased one from Buckeye Brewcraft here in Columbus. It's a 5-liter charred oak barrel, and I have a Scotch ale in there. Now I'm kind of getting worried. I forgot about it. So
sometimes those are the best.
Do the over oak, but I'm gonna put that in. We'll put that in bottle, see how that is. But it was, I don't know, it's like, I don't know, $79. It was pretty inexpensive. And I figured, what the heck, put some, Scotch ale in it, put it in my basement, put some bourbon in there with it. And, we'll see.
I only paid $100 for that 10-gallon barrel. I mean,
wow.
That's more than reasonable,
Yeah.
And you do if you do a double brew day, like I did, it makes it easy. And it's well worth it. It's well worth all the effort.
Sure.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited. I'm getting geeked. Matt, thanks for making that beer. I wish I had a can of that. I'm finishing up the Derry. Caleb, let's go. Let's hear what you have.
So the Epic Bourbon Truffle Stout. And so the kind of inspiration for this beer was a Brewdog beer, the Paradox. And so I actually kind of based my base recipe off of that and then tweaked it from there. And so base malt was just pale. And then I used chocolate malt, pretty heavy chocolate malt because I was going for a chocolate beer. So a lot of chocolate malt. The Carafa 2, which is a dehusked roasted malt that you get a lot less bitterness out of. Crystal 120, Munich for some maltiness, and Cara Amber also for just, to layer the kind of toffee and caramel kind of flavors. So original gravity came out at 1098, so just under 1.1, and then final gravity was 1024, so a little lower than yours, Matt, but still a pretty good mouthfeel, and finished up right around a little over 10%. And that was the yeast I used was actually Kvike yeast, which maybe we can talk more about at some point, but it was the Lutra Kvike yeast, and that can ferment pretty clean, but also pretty hot and fast, and which is pretty unique. That went into a 10-gallon bourbon barrel, ex-bourbon barrel, freshly dumped from 291 Distillery in Colorado Springs, and actually had the chance to visit that distillery after I had already put it in the barrel. I got it from a barrel distributor, and yeah, so got to taste the whiskey then that it came out of, which is pretty cool. And it actually stayed in the barrel from September 2022 to September 2023. So for a full year, pulled it out and then aged it on 4 types of cocoa nibs, and then Tahitian vanilla beans. And so the vanilla beans went in first, and so that they could really have a lot of time exposure there. And then the chocolate, very much kind of like the oak chips that Matt was talking about. You don't want to leave beer on cocoa nibs for very long. It can actually start getting bitter and start pulling out some of the nasties out of it. So the beer was on the cocoa nibs for about a little over 36 hours, not quite 2 days, on the chocolate. And it very much, I would taste it, every 4 hours or so to just kind of really see, when was kind of that sweet spot. And yeah, so let's pour it up. So I got my little twisty can here. These are super cool. And I can already smell it. I can smell the vanilla from here. So that is the
Sweet.
beer.
That's
Beautiful.
dark, yeah.
And it just wow. So actually the first thing I get is bourbon and chocolate. Okay. Definitely smell vanilla as well. Yours probably soaking in the higher proof bourbon actually pulled out probably more of the vanilla than I got, but I still smell it. And taste it. Oh, it's just coat your mouth in like melted chocolate. Yeah, melted chocolate. I do get, I mean, it was in there for a year. So there's a heavy bourbon, presence. Just like if you've ever been to a chocolate shop that have like a bourbon truffle, and it really has a lot of booze in it. So this tastes a little boozy. But it's also not like hot. There's no alcohol heat at all to this. And I think that has a lot to do with just the mellowing in the barrel for over a year. And yeah, I'm super pleased with it. And anybody who's tried it's been pretty happy as well. So
Cool.
cheers.
Nice. It definitely sounds like a labor of love. If you're willing to wait a year and, testing every, 4 hours when you're trying to see when to pull it off and everything like that. So that's great. So the big question, how many hop stars?
Yeah, I would put this one at least 4.5. With all the labor of love, I might put it all the way to like 4.75. I can't
All
ever
right.
be perfect. One thing I would be interested to see is if I use a different yeast, could it have finished maybe a little higher on the final gravity and maybe had even a thicker mouthfeel. Also, could have left all of that alone and just added some maltodextrin or something like that to even get it even more, thick, at the end. That'd be maybe something I could try different next
Yeah,
time, if there was a next time.
maltodextrin. Yeah, maltodextrin is your friend. It really will help you for sure. I'm curious, why'd you choose Kavik?
I um it was actually more logistics than anything else. I was headed out of town and I wanted to get it fermented fairly quick, and get it in the barrel before I left.
Sure.
So it from start to finish, it was done for all intents and purposes about 72 hours. It
Cool.
just plowed through and let it sit for a little bit longer after that, but way shorter fermentation than with any other, traditional yeast.
Oh,
Nice.
100%. Yeah. I didn't add. I use USO5. So, of course, I did a 2-week fermentation, but
That's right. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's pretty standard. That's interesting that you used a Kavik. And Lutra's a good
Well,
one. Very clean. Like
yeah,
you said.
it was good.
Yeah. Cool.
You got to be careful with some of the Kvike yeast because it can put off a little bit of. I did it one other time, more because I was just curious to see how high of a gravity will this stuff ferment, and it was pretty impressive. It got it up to about 15%.
Mhm.
But it also, I think, had a little bit of lacto mixed in, which some of them can, and it had just a hint of sourness to it. It wasn't off. It it just had it had a little bit of more acid than I was expecting. But that's why I went with the Lutra, which tends not to have that and be pretty clean.
Nice.
That's awesome.
There is a plenty of hope for this style of beer. As
Absolutely.
Right.
have shared their story, so I'm not giving up on it. And in fact, I made a different stout that I'll include that recipe in with the Epic Derry Oyster Stout. The other one I made, it's much better than the than the Oyster, and I'm glad that the stories and the beers that you guys shared are fantastic. I'm sitting here going, man, I wish I had one of those, but
I've got another keg and a half left of it, and it's going to take a while to get through it. So maybe we
road
can share
trip.
some.
Yeah, road
Yeah.
trip.
Perfect.
So yeah, can I take a second here? I was talking before we start recording. You've seen that what's the show called The Hoarders? I think I've become a stout hoarder. I didn't start out to be a stout hoarder, but going on the various epic beer trips this year, fantastic trips. I picked up this one. It's from Brew York. It's called the Obi-Wan cannoli pastry stout. It was part of their Star Wars stout group that they had. Now, Caleb, this one's coming your way. This is from Fierce. Okay, it's called the Big Moose. It's a fantastic stout. So that's another good one.
Such a great beer. Yeah.
I'm going through different refrigerators and finding this stuff. It's like, is it Christmas or what? So then I picked this up at Northern Monk when we were in England this year. It's called the Death Matter Custard. So it's a fantastic beer. And this was also on the England trip from Asvex. It's the Stocking Stuffer Nostalgia Imperial Stout. It's kind of like, Christmas meets beer stout. Fantastic.
Does it have spice in it? Like some of the like cinnamon and stuff?
Kind of, get a little kind of that fruit cake thing in a good way, because a lot of times fruit cake kind of gets a bad rap, but in a good way. Asvex in Liverpool, just some fantastic brew there. And I also picked up this is the Brewdog Declassified Demigod. This is a really great beer as well. I have upstairs.
I've got a bottle like right over there on, so yeah, that's a great beer. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Tactical Nuclear Penguin. I have some of that and some other stuff upstairs too. I didn't pull out, but yeah, I am. I'm going to admit on this episode of the Epic Homebrew Reveal, my name's Captain Kurt, and I am a stout hoarder. But I have a feeling, before the holidays and the end of the year, they'll be gone. It's okay. We'll talk again next year on another epic beer trip.
Yeah, well, it's stout season in general, as everyone's like in their hoodies. It's apparent, but also today when we're recording, which I probably shouldn't tell you because you may not see this for 2 weeks, but it's International Stout Day. I got an email from Untapped about 10 minutes before we started recording and saw, the badge, in today so that you can get it. And I was like, all right, kind of need to know about this. So apparently that was started in 2011 by Erin Peters. She's known as the beer goddess, who fortunately has passed, but it's kind of nice to have something to commemorate her in memory. And kind of was interesting to hear some of the stories, the different styles. Actually, what would you say, Caleb? There was a blonde or a golden? I wasn't familiar with that. So that was...
Matt, have you ever had a blonde stout?
I have never had one. I've seen them, but yeah, so just a beautiful golden beer that they call a blonde stout.
It's a really strange thing. Yeah, and you see it and you're like, oh, that'll be nice and refreshing and light, and then you taste it, and I think probably in a blind test you would say this is a dark beer. This is a stout. Wow. And so you'll have to look for those at your local brewery, or encourage them to try to make one.
I want to say something too. I'm just a home brewer. I just started this, barely like a year ago, and I've found making beers. I love hoppy beers, love them. But I tell you, as a home brewer, I found making the kind of more malt forward beers more successful. Now, putting the Epic Oyster set aside, but the beers I've made that have more kind of a malt backbone have really been some of my favorite beers as a home brewer. So, if you're a home brewer out there with limited experience like myself, don't be afraid to get into the stout game, because it's a fun game to get into. And Caleb, you mentioned this. It was a couple of years ago at the Brewdog AGM. Where these guys they're from LA. Was it Hops and Crosses or Dots and Crosses? Anyway, they had a stout, and it was in August. It was smoking hot, right? Mm-hmm. 85 degrees, high humidity.
I remember that year.
Stout, and I said, really? He goes, try it. And I was like, oh man, it was refreshing. So it's easy to say, I'll drink stouts in the winter, but don't limit yourself to drinking stouts just when it's a little bit chilly. So drink them, 12 months a year. So
there you go.
I'll add real quick. Brewing, when I started homebrewing, stouts were the reason I started homebrewing. I was drinking a lot of stouts. It was about this time of year in 2016, and I brewed a stout, a coffee stout with a friend, and we brewed it right here in this garage on the table I'm actually using, which I don't use to brew anymore. And we brewed it, and I kept it in my fridge for 4 or 5 months, maybe even longer. And it ended up taking first in a homebrew competition months later. It was the first all grain beer I'd ever brewed. And it shocked me, because I was like, well, maybe I was just luck or whatever, but I had a lot of fun. I brewed a lot of stouts up front, and it was really fun. Enjoyed it. My wife likes dark beer. And at the time, I was drinking a lot more dark beer than I do now. I really only brew dark beer in the wintertime. But it's a lot of fun. If you're out there and you're home brewing, try some dark beers.
Yeah, for sure. And play around with all the specialty malts, because it can really, change the experience of the finished product, for sure.
Without a doubt.
And I'm thinking too, as a future episode, we're talking about barrel aging and maybe get more into that. You guys have been in the game. I guess I'm in the game. I forgot about it in my basement. So maybe as a future episode, we can take a look at sharing some of those stories as well. So
for sure.
I want to thank everyone for joining us. Plus, Yakima Valley Hops, thank you guys for being a cool partner in this Epic Homebrew Reveal adventure.
Absolutely.
And we'll put all the recipes on the website, and feel free to take them, share them. You know, I'm looking forward to getting your recipes from the recipes from Caleb and Matt. So, you know, tweak them, play with them. And Matt, I'd love to hear your oyster stout.
I'll shoot you.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if you're ever in Derry, Northern Ireland, it's called the Walled City Brewery called Oyster. So get that stout if they have it. They only make it certain times of year, of course. But I guess there's an oyster around there. It's from some area called Oyster. So working on an epic beer trip to Northern Ireland as well. And feel free to check out epicbeertrips.com. Working on the trips for, you know, upcoming, you know, we're going to England, Scotland, Ireland, just some great stuff out there, and really appreciate everyone joining the fun and, you know, talking about beer.
The teasers that Kurt showed from some of the cans, those are kind of some of the things you can get on the trips. So I got a chance to go to Fierce, which was awesome. Looking forward to what they have next time. I don't know that I had the Moose one, so I'm going to obviously put that mentally on my list right now to do that. But I didn't get a chance to go to Northern Monk, but I really like seeing the photos from the tasting. People seem to really love that pastry tasting that you guys did there on the trip.
Yeah, that was actually at Brew York.
Brew York, you're right. Yeah.
Brew York pastry with some of their barrel-aged beers, stouts, and then in the afternoon we went to Northern Monk. That was a fantastic.
I've heard great things about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just great. Yeah, that pastry tasting thing was something I added on the trip, and it turned out, you know, we do follow-up surveys from all of our trips. Highest rated beer-related activity of any epic beer trips at Brew York. Wow. And just a fantastic thing. It's something happens when you start to get that sweet and sweet combined. It just cancels out, and then you get these flavors. Well, we do the same thing. We do. There's a company called Pure Baklava, and we'll put it in the follow-up too. I tell you, this coming up. If you want to have some fun, no matter where you are, go to purebaklava.com, order some of their baklava, get a stout or 2 or 3, okay, and then do a baklava stout tasting. We do events here in Columbus, but you can do it at home. It'll blow your mind. It will totally blow your mind. It's purebaklava.com. Again, we'll put it in the follow-up and get some stouts. I've had people do this all over the world. They're just like, I can't believe it, right? It's an unbelievable taste sensation. You're talking vanilla and some of the things, you know, cinnamon, some of these other things you get in stouts.
Well, nutty,
yeah. You start pairing it with the baklava, it just starts exploding in your mouth. So, you know, try that at home.
Yeah, and so obviously a lot of people are going to be homebrewers, so they're probably already looped in. But for the folks that are just people who enjoy stouts, are there any tips? So I know that they're typically enjoy and open up a little bit more when they're warmer. You know, anything else that you would add to that? You know, maybe just set the beer out of the fridge, you know, 30 minutes before you want to enjoy it, or a glass that you have your hands around it. You know, anything else that we kind of need to be thinking about to really get things going?
Yeah, something you can kind of wrap your hand around, get warmed up. Pulled this out of the fridge, you know, 30 minutes before we started filming, and that definitely will help it open up, and you can taste a lot more of the flavors, you know, when it's not ice cold.
Yep. Pour those beers hard too. Get those aromas going, you know, get those really roasty chocolate, vanilla, whatever it is. Pour it hard, get those aromas rolling out of that glass.
Yeah. And I'd add, don't be afraid to be a stout hoarder. There's Zaftig Brewery here in Columbus. They have this thing called the Old Rugger Series. They're coming up on Saturday. I'm going there. I'm going to be standing in line like a geek, you know, just to get some to stash. So, yeah, don't be afraid to be a stout hoarder. It's a good thing.
Right. So this is a beer that can age well, or at least hold up well. Is there any, you know, guidelines or general rules of thumb? I mean, I know I've got stuff in there from probably 2015. I'm assuming it's still, you know, perfectly fine. I'm kind of waiting to do a vertical tasting on a few of them that I'm excited about. But anything like, should I be storing things upright, you know, on its side? Does it really matter? Toss up?
Yeah, I would say that's a toss-up. I've had a couple beers from Dogfish Head. I did the Worldwide Stout. I had a 2017 version of it that I just opened this past summer, and I shared it with some friends, and actually it was kind of crappy. It wasn't very good, and I was a little upset about it because I figured it would hold up. I mean, it was like 17 or 18%, but it had really kind of it was past its prime. But
how did you store it?
All of them are going to be that way.
Yeah.
I like that.
How do you store it, Matt?
I stored it in my basement, so it was stored in a warmer temperature. But
Okay.
you know, I kept it in the fridge. I knew that I was coming up on a time period where I wanted it to be cool, so I put it in my fridge actually for a few weeks before I even drank it. And I thought, well, whatever. But you know, and it doesn't change. The temperature down there doesn't fluctuate very much, so it doesn't get warm down there. You know, you're looking at like 68 degrees at the most year round.
Wow.
So I was a little sad by that. Now I've stored Voodoo beers for 5 years, 6 years, and of course they've been fine. I feel like the packaging maybe was less than adequate.
Could be packaging. You know, some of the more heavily adjunct beers, you know, along the like pastry stout kind of thing, like from Burial or the Veil or, you know, something like that. Those I would probably store in the fridge, you know, and not out. But I have some that I do store, you know, just out under the bar, and they do just fine, you know, most of the time. But I've had a few, like Matt said, that don't taste like they should, and so it definitely, you know, there's a lot of variables that could go into that. But when in doubt, I would probably put it in the fridge for long-term storage.
Yeah. You know, this is a great question, Tess. And here's what I'm thinking, Caleb. We have our friend Martin Keene at Brewlosophy, right? I'm going to reach out to him and say, Martin, you should do an episode on that. Martin he's a fantastic guy, great brewer, but he also has this kind of analytical / scientific way of looking at things. He was featured in our Scottish Ale episode, but he'd be one of those guys that could put
that's something I don't know if he's ever looked at, is same exact beer stored differently, and can you tell the odd man out, you know, kind of thing.
Put to a group of tasters, and he's got this fantastic English you know, thing going. It's I'm sending him an email tonight.
That'd be a lot of fun to see the difference.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Well,
awesome, everybody.
Enjoying the fun. Anybody else some parting words?
No. Well, I think that I have my education now. I feel like I'm brushed up on my stouts. I'm probably going to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole looking for some new things. I think kind of revisiting the classics too. I mean, like a good Irish stout, you can't go wrong with it. So looking forward to that. And also, so we'll be posting this on epicbeertrips.com, on YouTube. Also, if anybody has ideas, recipes, or even wants to join to be a guest, we do welcome that. So yeah,
Fantastic.
Shout out in the comments.
Yeah, we'll have the next episode first quarter next year in 2024.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it.
I want to thank you guys for having me on here. I really appreciate it. I will forward you guys the recipe so you can post the recipe for the barrel aged vanilla stout.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it, Matt.
I'll send you that oyster stout too.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for joining us. You know, Matt, nice to meet you. And Caleb, Tess, always appreciate your help. And check out epicbeertrips.com. Fantastic beer trips. We travel the globe, drink beer, and have fun. Just working on some good, really cool stuff in the future. I'm excited. So thanks again for joining us.
Awesome. Cheers, everybody.
Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers.
All right.